This is Hannibal here from thehannibaltv.com, and today I'm going to do a retro review of the Wrestling Observer issue that discuss Eric Bischoff's 1999, September 9th, 1999, firing, or sorry, not firing, reassignment, which basically I believe he ended up sitting at home and getting paid. I don't know if he was ever actually reassigned to do anything within the Turner organization. But let's get into it. I found it pretty interesting. So if nothing else, I'm doing this for myself because I was a big WCW fan, and I actually like Eric Bischoff. I have nothing against him. If I was ever a multi-millionaire or had good funding for a pro wrestling company, I would definitely have asked try and hire him as one of my advisors. 100%. I think he's a very smart guy. So he was officially relieved of his duties as executive vice president September 9th, 1999. No exact reason was given for the move. However, according to Meltzer, virtually everyone felt it was necessary and going to happen, although it happened earlier than expected. He returned home to Wyoming, awaiting a reassignment that I don't think ever happened. He had several years left on his large contract. Everyone knows they eventually reassigned him back to WCW. Apparently, at the September 10th WCW house show in Baltimore, WCW house show rather, wrestlers were singing, quote, "Ding dong, the witch is dead," end quote, backstage. The show had 6,413 in attendance, headlined by Goldberg against Sid. Flair was apparently the head agent for the show backstage, but was not on the show, and claimed he was embarrassed by the size of the crowd in Baltimore. I don't know if back in the NWA days, honestly, when Flair was headlining, they ever had much more than 6,000 in Baltimore. I know, for example, recently I was reading the Starcade. I think it may have been '95, where Hogan fought Brutus Beefcake at the Municipal Auditorium in Nashville, and it was totally sold out before the event and did a great buy rate. And in comparison, the Flair Steamboat match from Nashville was not sold out. There was several thousand tickets still available. There's only 4,000 something in Nashville. So Flair saying that, he may have just been saying that maybe in the WCW era, since they're just coming off the boom, 6,000 is a disappointment. But by today's standards, I mean, let's say AEW was in Baltimore, getting half that number would still be considered a good number. Maybe not in 1999. Anyways, and just for reference, for the September 13th Nitro, which would have been the last Nitro, technically with the build up from Eric Bischoff's regime, because they took over him for him this week. That Nitro from Chapel Hill, North Carolina, had 5,571 in attendance, which is still better than your average Dynamite taping these days. And I'm not taking anything away from Dynamite. WWE's doing closer to around averaging, I would say, around 8,000 for their TV tapings right now. Dynamite, from the figures I see, seems to be between 3 and 5,000. That seems to be including comps for today's, just to compare it to today's. But back to Bischoff. Meltzer states here he was replaced for a number of reasons, combination of numerous bad deals, falling ratings, falling house show numbers, and pay-per-view buy rates. The company is temporarily in the hands of Bill Bush, whose title was changed from Vice President of Strategic Planning to Executive Vice President. The creative control at this point is in the hands of Craig Leathers, who has the final say but it's the same booking committee of Kevin Nash, Dusty Rhodes, and Kevin Sullivan, which Meltzer says, quote unquote, got them into this mess. Well, Sullivan was part of the 83 weeks of dominance. Sullivan was the booker when they were destroying WWE in ratings too. Everyone has ups and downs in booking. I mean, I was still watching. I can't remember specifically this time in '99, but I know I was never missing a Nitro or Thunder in these days. Um, Apparently, the wrestlers really liked Kevin Nash at this time being added to the booking team. Meltzer brings up the Bischoff Pillman feud. Pillman thought Bischoff's reassignment was a work. Meltzer says the Pillman angle itself never drew any money for the company, but it got a lot of attention and fooled a lot of people for several weeks, including the majority of wrestlers for a week or two. Well, if it did get the company attention, I wouldn't say it wouldn't drew a dime. I know that I didn't understand it at the time as a kid who the internet was still in its infancy, and I really didn't understand it other than it seemed exciting and they were making it seem like something behind the scenes was going on, which was one of the first times I was ever done. So I wouldn't say it was a bad thing. It never had the payoff because Pillman ended up double crossing WCW and going to WWE, where, let's face the facts, Pillman really didn't do much in WWE that great, honestly. And I like Brian Pillman, but I think he made a mistake double crossing Bischoff because in WWE he ended up coming back from his ankle injury too soon. Never feuded with Austin. The biggest feud I remember him having was the Gold Dust one where he wore a dress and then he ended up dying in his early 30s. So he should, in retrospect, he probably should have just stayed with WCW. But we, none of us have access to a time machine, sadly. Although some people claim they do, with all these internet time traveler videos out there, which I don't believe it at all. As far as these weirdos that claim to be time travelers on the internet. Anyways, Bischoff, according to Meltzer, to go back into this report, Bischoff's track record overall going into '99 was excellent. Although in hindsight, maybe there was some luck involved. He took the company from losing $30 million a year in '93 when he took over. Or sorry, he took the company from a $30 million a year company, so they were taking in $30 million a year and losing $6 million, to in 1998 they grossed $200 million, had $55 million in profit, which is amazing. He was the person most responsible for the creation of the current wrestling boom. His ideas were almost short-sighted, according to Meltzer, and not enough long-term planning. I agree that you could say Bischoff did pretty much create the current wrestling boom by creating Nitro and really adding a lot of unique angles into the product. Meltzer goes on to say Bischoff was blamed for making bad deals and desperate attempts to turn ratings around from $1 million giveaways on Nitro, which the plug was pulled on, to bringing in Master P. I don't think anyone's going to argue about Master P other than they could have made up for the Master P mistake by pushing the West Texas Rednecks, because the West Texas Rednecks were over like crazy. Everybody loved them, even up here in Canada. People loved them. People at my school loved them. Like, the songs were over, and like they just completely disbanded the West Texas Rednecks with no explanation. Threw in Virgil at one point as Curly Bill. I think that's when we knew the West Texas Rednecks were done. That was horrible. but they had gold with the West Texas Rednecks. Then Meltzer brings up signing Kiss and Megadeth. Kiss for 500,000 to do a few songs on Nitro. Megadeth for 250,000 for one, and bringing in Dennis Rodman for $1 million deal. With the gap between WWE and WCW still spreading during all this time. He also brings up that Bischoff had let Austin go. Although I have read a lot of stuff that Bischoff really did have a bad attitude backstage. So it probably was honestly more than a torn tricep. And if I ever interview Bischoff myself, I will ask about this. And the more you read about and do shoot interviews on stuff, and maybe you do have to be protective of yourself backstage. But Austin definitely, I could see why, because there was a bunch of times where he refused to job to people. And in wrestling, especially in major companies, that will stall a push. For better or worse, I can understand why he refused to job to the people that he didn't want to job to, and complained about some of the jobs he did do. But he was generally unhappy, and when Hogan came in, he was really unhappy as well. So I actually understand why they let him go. And I was a bigger fan of Austin in WCW than WWE, and I like Steve Austin. But as I said, I can understand why they let him go. But yeah, he did end up. Honestly, was he going anywhere in WWE before the John 316 thing blew him up? I mean, sometimes you just strike lightning, and opportunity happens, and he did great for himself. So good for Steve Austin. They also mentioned letting Chris Jericho go. Chris Jericho there's another guy I liked better in WCW. He was amazing in WCW. I felt like when he had to fight for his position and come up with all this unique stuff to get over, that was when he was the best. I was a massive fan of it. I still think he's great, but WCW definitely shouldn't have let him go. And then he went on to immediately feud with The Rock in WWE and become a big star. And Bischoff mentions with pretty much every headliner in WCW at this time past 40, them continuing to push in Hogan and Savage as top stars, with Bischoff at the helm, could have been is a problem. However, I'll be honest, when they put Slapnuts, Jeff Jarrett, Mid Carter as the star, and that flopped, as bad as him ripping off Honky Tonk Man's guitar smashing. I mean, I'd rather have kept Hogan as champion than that horrible Jeff Jarrett run as WCW champion, and the David Arquette runs. Even honestly, the Vince Russo runs were bad. As much as I like Booker T, he was better as a U.S. champion than a world champion to me, and a tag team wrestler. In WWE, he came into his own more, but in WCW, I liked him better as Harlem Heat, and when he had his U.S. title, I think that's when I liked him best in WCW. The era when he finally got his WCW push, I didn't like it, but his WWE push, I did like overall, and his King Booker thing I liked. Meltzer brings up that the company was pretty much on the verge of folding WCW, and he turned it all the way around and made it the economic center of the wrestling universe for a while, changing the landscape of the business. True. He said he came up with the idea of bringing Nitro head to head with Raw, which most people thought was insane. And Vince would hand his ass to him, which obviously he ended up handing Vince's ass to him for 83 weeks. Nitro was able to duel effectively with Raw for about 9 months. Then when the NWO angle happened, they became dominant. Meltzer brings up that Nash and Hall's original contracts were for $750,000 a year, which a lot of people scoffed at as if they were going to be overpaid. And a lot of people didn't think the Hogan heel turn would work either, but obviously that's chump change for everything they did for WCW. Meltzer goes on to say Bush, who's taken over from Bischoff, is a nice man. He's been involved in wrestling for about 9 years. Remains to be seen how he will do running WCW. And he brings up that Craig Leathers, who is heading the production part of the company, is not liked. And he fears that WCW is only going to get more political without Bischoff around. I could say things only got worse. Things only got worse and worse and worse. If they had just kept Bischoff the whole time, would it have made a difference? Honestly, probably would have been better to just keep him the head. Maybe he needed an ego check or some type of punishment at one point, or some type of wake up call, but or a break, allow him to have a vacation and come back. But I honestly think if they just kept him in charge instead of the constant changes they were doing for the next 3 years, it would have been better. Because we ended up seeing some of the worst wrestling ever. They bring up the proposed New Year's Eve Kiss pay-per-view event was canceled, even though WCW had already put a large deposit fee to secure the date. Apparently, on this event, the Demon, then played by Brian Adams, who WCW spent $600,000 to get off the ground, was supposed to feud with Vampiro and fight him at this event, where Demon was going to be called the son of the devil, but he would have turned good. And the whole angle would be Vampiro was supposed to be sent down from the devil to bring him back, but there was going to be a showdown at the New Year's Eve pay-per-view. And the Demon was going to toss Vampiro into a vat of holy water. And when he got out, he'd be a new character. And apparently this time, Vampiro had just signed a 3-year contract. Interesting. Here's a rare note that a lot of people don't know. I was actually supposed to wrestle Vampiro instead of Kevin Nash at that Thunder Bay event, but he no-showed the press conference. So I just changed the match to me against Kevin Nash with Terry Funk as the referee. It was supposed to be Nash against Steiner. But I was pissed because that was the whole press conference to sell the show, and Vampiro didn't want to do it. So I still like and respect Vampiro overall, but there's some weird things about him. $1 million giveaway idea was dropped. Apparently, the wrestling movie, which we now know was called Ready to Rumble, that Bischoff was supposed to play the role of the Vince McMahon-like promoter, is still going to happen because the movie's too far along to cancel. Bischoff's role will be replaced by Joey Paltalone, who was in Risky Business and Midnight Run. Yeah, now that they mention it, I remember him collecting Tom Cruise's parents' furniture in Risky Business, which, by the way, is a great movie. One of my favorite movies. Shout out to Chicago for that one. There will be no more Road Wild pay-per-view shows. This sounds like a horribly stupid idea. A Monday Night Nitro weekly cartoon that was supposed to start on September 13th has been canceled. This was a Jason Hervey and Mandalay Entertainment production. Apparently, one of the issues with Bischoff was because of his association with Hervey. And by the way, I think he eventually joined Mandalay Entertainment because when Hervey and Bischoff did Mat Rats that I was a part of, it was Mandalay Entertainment working with a guy named Graham Owens that later went to prison 10 years because he was a drug runner, flying, I believe, cocaine. You can search up his name, Graham Owens. Went to jail for 10 years. He was a pilot that was transporting cocaine into Canada, and it was him and Eric Bischoff and Jason Hervey that originally wanted to do a kids wrestling show, which in the end they wanted to sell that to MTV. In the end, MTV ended up doing Wrestling Society X, but the original concept was for Mat Rats, which Bischoff was a part of, and I was a part of. Harry Smith, Rick Victor, Natalia, T.J. Wilson, Ted Hart before he totally lost it. Um, Randy Myers, who I believe at one point was Evolve champion, was in it. Jack Evans. But yeah, I remember Mandalay Entertainment was it. So this is interesting that one of the issues was Bischoff had heat on him from the WCW office for cutting a bad deal with Jason Hervey to market WCW videos when they could have used the in-house marketing team. So you have to wonder about that deal. Is all I'm going to say about that. And apparently he didn't want to fire someone from his secretary staff who had written African American joke after there was a huge thing about equal rights at work. So those were two things that added to his heat. Apparently, in the next few weeks, booking meetings were planned, and they wanted to book more long term because at this point, all three companies were booking basically as they flew in that night. It wasn't that organized, and when it was organized, everything changed, which still happens a lot of times as we hear Vince McMahon the day of causing things to be rewritten. Although back then, you hardly hear about wrestlers complaining about it, whereas now all the wrestlers will complain to the dirt sheets like babies. Anyways, overall, a great job by Eric Bischoff. I'm a huge nerd when it comes to that stuff, so I know some people aren't going to be interested into that, but a lot of them will. Kid Nichols. God, don't remind me of Kid Nichols. The Kiss Demon was where WCW lost him. They ended up, Dale Torborg ended up taking over the Kiss Demon, and they went with it even longer. And I know Gene Simmons writes about it like it was a success. So I don't think they should have canceled the Kiss concert thing. Maybe some of the angle ideas were bad, but if they'd already put a deposit on it, maybe they should have just gone about promoting it a better way because Kiss has a massive fan base. Someone says Master P would do anything for money. Apparently, like the No Limit Soldiers, like Big Swole, who I can't even remember having one match, who did an interview with John Paz on this channel, was making like $300,000 to $400,000 a year. Where the West Texas Rednecks overall were making a lot less than that. Then they get over, and then they just disbanded the Rednecks. I don't get it. Maybe that's one of the things I'm most pissed off about for WCW. The West Texas Rednecks angle was dropped, and soon after they let Barry Windham go and do that awful stalker gimmick in WWE and the forgettable Blackjacks gimmick. Kurt Hennig never really. I really can't remember much else from Hennig other than the Shawn Stasiak match, which was fair, not that memorable. But like he was over like crazy in the Rednecks, and then Kendall Windham went back to being Kendall Windham. I mean, Bobby Duncan Jr. ended up dying, so just a horrible, horrible end. And Virgil. I mean, not that Curly Bill was over, but what the hell happened to Virgil after the West Texas? Does anyone remember what happened to Virgil after the West Texas Rednecks? Did he just go back to being Virgil? I think we all hated the new WCW logo. Vampiro's a guy that's always very nice I was a fan of his, and I really wanted to wrestle him. Um, it's just a really unfortunate thing because I'm glad it happened the way it did because I never would have worked with Terry Funk otherwise. But Vampiro and I were supposed to have this crazy violent press conference, and it would have been even more violent than the one that happened with Terry Funk, as you guys can imagine. Terry Funk would have still been there and probably got involved in some way. But you can imagine at that press conference, it was actually supposed to be me and Vampiro fighting. Terry Funk is an amazing man, and he stepped in and he agreed, well, there's got to be some sort of action. Nash was filming Magic Mike in Minnesota and actually drove up from Minnesota, so he couldn't come in early for it either. And not only that, but we couldn't afford Nash, but Terry Funk didn't ask for any more money to do the press conference, and he was willing to get a very, very realistic thing, which we ended up getting over 3,000 for an indie show, which is great. I don't know Vampiro well enough to know anything about that. Somebody bought the Kid Nichols shirt, but since then I found one more. But somebody bought it. There's a great fan. I've got a lot of great fans on here, but there's one fan in particular, Mike Clark. Big shout out. He like if I ever die, he's going to be a very rich man. He I would say by far I got a lot of fans, and I appreciate all of you. He might be the biggest Hannibal collector of any fan with all the stuff he has. There is a guy in Hawaii that bought a bunch of stuff. A few people all over the U.S. Mike is in Thorold, Ontario. Huge collector. So shout out to him because I myself am not a collector. I used to be when I was a kid, but not as an adult. I only collect shoot interviews now, so I hope everyone enjoyed that. And let's end it with this. Terry Funk is a legend. Yes, I fully agree. They should have had him on the WCW booking committee instead of Dusty Rhodes.
Thank you for watching the Hannibal TV. Please like this video if you enjoyed it and click the subscribe button to not miss any